He figured it'd be nothing more than a quick errand. A favor for his sister, and then done. A former Navy SEAL working private security, he was just the ride, delivering her to a small animal shelter while her car sat in the shop. No plans beyond that. He'd wait. Keep his guard up the way he always did. Stay sealed inside that familiar distance he'd built between himself and anything that might threaten his solitude. Then a kennel gate swung open. Something small tumbled out, stumbled across the floor on unsteady legs, and clamped onto his pant leg like it had been counting the minutes until he arrived. He glanced down, already reaching to pry it loose, but the thing held on, and in that still, unremarkable moment, the very thing he'd spent years outrunning had already decided for him. Drop us the name of the city you're watching from. We genuinely want to know. And if stories like this land somewhere real for you, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. A sharp April morning in Ashford, Montana. The kind of day where winter still breathed through the wind, even as the ground pushed pale green shoots up through wet soil. Caleb Rourke drove with one hand loose on the wheel, the other resting near the gear selector. His eyes stayed fixed on the road, the same locked-in attention he brought to security monitors, access points, and anyone lingering too long near a construction barricade. He'd left the Navy years back, but the Navy hadn't entirely left him. The close-cut hair, the eyes that cataloged everything before the body committed to a position. His face carried more than age. It carried weather, weight, terrain that didn't show up on maps. The stubble along his jaw got trimmed only when it started to itch. These days he worked site security on a construction project, walking the fence line, checking locks, watching trucks roll in and out, copying plate numbers into a small pocket notebook. Simple work, predictable, the kind that guaranteed nothing followed him home. He meant to keep it exactly that way, detour or no detour. His younger sister Lily sat in the passenger seat, clutching her coffee cup like it was part lifeblood, part security blanket. She had a gift for filling silence without waiting for permission. The kind of person who could start talking to a stranger at a gas pump and walk away knowing the name of their dog, where they worked, and what they'd eaten for dinner the night before. Her dark blonde hair fell loose around her face, pinned back with more confidence than precision. She saw the world with a default optimism. Caleb had once respected that about her. Lately, his concern ran more toward making sure she didn't hand her bank details to some smooth-talking stranger with a startup pitch. She'd recently taken in a kitten from this same shelter, and with her car sitting dead at the mechanics, she'd roped Caleb into driving her back. Questions about diet, some paperwork, and the unexplainable war her new cat had declared on her laundry basket. He agreed because saying no to Lily always cost more energy than saying yes. The shelter turned out smaller than he'd expected. Bright, scrubbed clean, carrying a faint blend of disinfectant, kibble, and bedding warmed by afternoon sun. Lily headed straight for the front desk, that radiant smile already doing its work on everyone in range. Caleb drifted. Down a corridor, past a row of enclosures, until he reached the small dog section at the far end. A bench sat beside a window, solid wall behind it, clear sightline to the entrance reflected in the glass. He chose the spot without thinking. His body still made these calculations faster than his conscious mind could intervene. He assumed this careful positioning would buy him what had always bought him: uninterrupted solitude. That's where Clara found him. She came around a corner with a clipboard braced against her hip, moving with the quiet competence of someone trained to settle panicked animals and nervous humans in the same shift. She looked to be somewhere in her mid-30s. Chestnut hair pulled back loosely, clear brown eyes, a face that came alive more in the act of listening than in anything she said. Quiet, but not the kind of quiet that shrinks from a room. "Are you here with Lily?" she asked. Caleb gave a short nod. "Just driving. Just waiting," she corrected gently, her gaze moving from the bench to him. He nearly offered something clipped, the kind of remark designed to seal a conversation shut. But the unexpected softness in her voice disarmed him. He spoke instead. Told her about a former teammate who brewed coffee so aggressively strong that the rest of the unit swore it could dissolve paint off a bulkhead. It was a nothing story. That was exactly why he told it. In his experience, most women met military anecdotes with polite, half-present smiles. Clara laughed at the right moment, asked whether anyone had actually been brave enough to drink the stuff. then followed with another question, and another. She wasn't humoring him. She was paying attention. Quote 3, quote, she offered. Quote 4, quote, something wound tight inside Caleb loosened. Barely. Quote 5, quote, she nodded. Quote 6, quote, he looked at her then. Actually looked, he said, low. The silence that followed didn't press against him the way silence usually did. It just rested there. Clara shifted the clipboard to her other arm. Want to meet one of our puppies? Every reflex built across years of deliberate isolation told him to say no. Before Caleb could answer, a kennel door unlatched behind her. What came through wasn't so much a burst of energy as a purposeful wobble. A 5-week-old German Shepherd puppy, all oversized feet, plush black and tan coat, ears that hadn't yet committed to any particular direction. It slipped slightly on the polished floor and locked onto him with the singular focus of a creature that had already made up its mind. Caleb barely had time to straighten before the pup reached his boot, planted both front paws against his leg, and began hauling itself upward, like this was simply the next logical step. Then it discovered the keyring hanging from his belt, clamped down with fierce concentration. Caleb stared. The puppy pulled. The keys didn't move. The puppy dug in harder, slid back half an inch, reset, tried again, all with the solemn determination of a miniature soldier locked in a doomed but absolutely essential engagement. A laugh broke out of him before he could stop it. Quick, genuine, rough from years of going unused. From the reception area, Lily spun around so fast her coffee nearly breached its lid. Quote 10, quote, she called out, eyes wide. Quote 11, quote. Clara smiled, a quiet, knowing thing that lit up her whole face. Quote 12, quote, she said. Quote 13, quote. Caleb reached down, and Milo immediately used his wrist as a foothold. Quote 14, quote, he said. The words sounded reasonable enough. The puppy's absolute certainty suggested a different conclusion entirely. By the time Lily finished at the front desk and came to collect him, Caleb had mostly reassembled his standard composure, or tried to. He thanked Clara, gave a single nod, walked toward the door. It should have ended there, a passing encounter. A small animal, nothing of consequence. Then, a tug at his pant leg. He glanced down. Milo had trailed him the length of the corridor and now gripped the fabric of his work trousers with both front paws. Holding on with clumsy, stubborn resolve. No biting, no whimpering, just refusing to let go, as though something between them remained unfinished. Caleb stood perfectly still, staring at the tiny German Shepherd anchored to his boot. For the first time in longer than he could measure, something inside that deep internal silence shifted. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Lily talked the entire way. Her free hand kept lifting off her coffee cup to emphasize some new detail about the kitten, its apparent declaration of open warfare against the laundry basket, its pointed refusal of expensive food in favor of shoelaces, which it treated as a strategic objective of the highest order. Caleb gave the kind of answers that keep a conversation moving without actually entering it. Short, functional, empty of anything real. His mind wasn't tracking her words. At every red light, through every slow curve in the road, it kept circling back to the same thing, a small pressure against his leg, a grip that had no business being as strong as it was. He could still feel it, like something left unfinished. Lily said, eyes narrowing. He said nothing. Lily studied him for a beat, then settled back into her seat. A quiet smile crept across her face, the kind that arrives when a piece clicks into place. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 20, underscore, 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 quote, underscore 21, underscore, 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 quote, underscore 22, underscore, underscore, she said on the road. Quote 21, quote 22, she murmured, unconvinced. Quote 23. He didn't argue. Not because she was right, because he couldn't find a clean way to say she was wrong, and that, more than it should have, got under his skin. By the time he pulled up to her place, the talk had drifted back to her cat, her schedule, her evening plans, small, ordinary things. Caleb nodded at the right moments, waited until she disappeared inside, then pulled away. The construction site met him the way it always did. Half-built frameworks, pallets of materials stacked in rows, the fading echo of machinery from earlier crews still hanging in the air. Night security meant fewer bodies, wider silence, longer stretches of the same thing over and over. He walked the perimeter, checked every lock, logged the last delivery truck that had rolled through before sunset. Every motion slid into place without thought. Muscle memory doing what muscle memory does. It should have been enough. Around 9:30, he settled into the cramped office beside the gate. His notebook lay open. Plate numbers, timestamps, observations so routine they barely needed writing down. He wrote them anyway. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He let it ring once, then picked up. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 24, underscore, underscore. He didn't respond right away. You walked off with one of our markers yesterday, she said, voice easy and unhurried. It's got the center's name on it. I'd appreciate getting it back before someone audits my supply closet. Caleb looked down at the table. There it was. He had no memory of taking it. I'll return it, he said. Figured you would, she replied. A small gap of silence, then, also, thought you'd want to see this. A message came through. He opened it. A photo. Milo, with his head halfway buried in a food bowl, tilted at an angle that suggested he'd started eating and then lost track of why he was doing it. One paw sat inside the bowl, staking a claim for later, apparently. Caleb looked at the image longer than he meant to. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 30, underscore, underscore. Clara's voice followed. Starts something, forgets the point, then commits to it anyway. Caleb leaned back in his chair just slightly. Is that normal? She asked. For him? Probably. Another message arrived. A second photo. Milo curled in an awkward knot beside the same bowl, out cold, as though the sheer effort of not eating had drained every ounce of him. Caleb typed, paused, deleted, typed again. That position doesn't look efficient. He stared at the words a moment before hitting send. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. It's not. He's still working most things out. Another pause. Then Caleb typed again. How much is he eating? Clara didn't answer right away this time. Quote, 38, quote, she said. Quote, 39, quote. Caleb looked at the photo once more. A small body, too still. He locked the screen, set the phone on the desk, then picked it up again a minute later, as if his hand had moved without consulting him. The rest of his shift dragged in a way it usually didn't. Nothing happened, no incidents worth noting. But he missed a camera rotation, logged the same license plate twice before catching the error. No one else would have seen it. He did. By the time his shift ended, pale light was bleeding into the eastern sky. A new day starting the way they always start. Only this time, something sat differently. A low hum of unease he couldn't name. He drove home, slept in broken pieces for a few hours, then got back on the road toward the site, same route he always took. At the fork near the town's outer edge, the road split cleanly, left toward the job site, right toward the animal sanctuary. Caleb eased off the gas. The light shifted green, and he swung right, pointing the truck down the sanctuary road before second thoughts could catch up. A few hundred yards in, his phone finally buzzed. Rourke, where are you? Denny. Caleb kept his gaze fixed on the asphalt. Running late, personal errand, I'll be in. A pause. Then the reply came back, tighter this time. We've got a delivery waiting. Don't make this a habit. I said I'll be there, Caleb fired back, killing the exchange before it could grow legs. By the time he rolled into the sanctuary lot, the plan had already assembled itself. Walk in, hand back the marker, quick look around, leave. Clean, efficient, done. The plan lasted about 9 seconds. Clara glanced up the instant he stepped through the door. He didn't eat much this morning. That was all it took. Caleb followed her without a single question, some quiet knowing already settling into the back of his skull. This visit had stopped being about a marker. He'd crossed a line that morning, one nobody had drawn in words. The marker still sat in his jacket pocket, but it had lost its usefulness as an excuse. Milo was awake, pacing in tight, restless circles until the moment he registered Caleb's presence. No pause, no calculation, just that same plain, unguarded approach forward. Caleb dropped to a crouch, one hand draped loosely over his knee. "You're supposed to eat," he said quietly, more reflex than real instruction. Milo ignored him completely. The puppy pressed forward, nose zeroing in on Caleb's jacket pocket. Before Caleb could intercept, Milo hooked the edge with his teeth and pulled free a crumpled, softened receipt from the construction site, worthless by any measure. Except to Milo. The pup clamped down and bolted. Caleb blinked once, then gave chase without thinking. Quote, _46, __. Milo didn't run far, just far enough to turn it into a contest, paws skidding on the floor as he readjusted his grip, tail swinging with stubborn purpose. The receipt trailed behind him like a stolen flag. For a breath, Caleb just stood there, watching. Then something broke loose. A laugh, sudden, too loud, ungoverned. The kind that slips past every internal checkpoint. It startled him as much as anyone. Clara didn't step in. She simply observed, something shifting behind her expression as the scene unfolded. Caleb moved forward at last, bending to reclaim the paper. This time Milo gave it up easily, as though the point had already been made. Caleb asked, shaking his head. Clara answered. Caleb exhaled through his nose, folded the receipt, and tucked it back into his pocket. The room quieted again, but it carried a different weight now. His phone rang. He didn't need to look. Caleb stepped to the side and picked up. "Rourke, where are you?" Denny skipped every courtesy. "You were supposed to be here 40 minutes ago. I've got a driver asking questions I can't answer." "I know," Caleb said. "I'm not coming in right now." A beat of silence. "What?" "Taking the morning off, personal." "You're serious?" Denny's voice sharpened to a point. Caleb replied, steady as concrete. Silence held for a long moment. Denny warned. Another pause, then a short, hard exhale on the other end. The line cut. Caleb lowered the phone slowly, eyes resting on the dark screen for a beat before sliding it back into his pocket. When he turned around, Clara hadn't moved, but she wasn't pretending she hadn't heard every word either. "You're going to have to deal with that," she said. Not a warning. Just a fact laid on the table. "I always do." She nodded once, then leaned her shoulder against the side of the enclosure. "My dad used to spend hours mending fences," she said. Not because anything was broken, just because it gave him an excuse not to talk to people. Caleb let out a short breath. "I'm not hiding." "Didn't say you were." He glanced over at her. She held his eyes without effort. "You're just remarkably good at finding spaces where nobody thinks to look." The words landed somewhere they shouldn't have. Caleb didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped instead. Milo had settled near his boot again, not climbing this time, not nudging for attention, just there. That was new. Caleb exhaled slowly and straightened up. "What do I need to sign?" Clara didn't respond immediately, as though she needed a second to confirm she'd heard him right. "You mean that?" Caleb gave a single nod. "Yeah." No long conversation had led to this. No flash of clarity he could trace back to one moment. The decision had formed somewhere beneath the noise, quiet and already made. Clara pushed off the enclosure wall and moved toward the desk. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "Let's get the paperwork started." The process was brief. A handful of forms, a handful of questions, most of them simple. Caleb answered without pause. Signed where indicated. Didn't let himself second guess. By the time he finished, Milo had already claimed the patch of floor beside his feet as sovereign ground. When everything was complete, Clara handed him a small packet. Basic care instructions, a feeding schedule, emergency numbers. Caleb took it, eyes passing over the pages without fully registering them. "Quote 76, quote 77, she asked. He looked down at the puppy, then back at her. "Quote 78, quote." Clara held his gaze another beat, then gave a small nod. Caleb lifted Milo carefully, still not quite used to the weight, and turned for the door. He didn't head straight home. He pulled into a small supply shop at the edge of town instead. The place smelled faintly of hay and rubber mats. Shelves lined with things he hadn't thought about in years. A middle-aged clerk behind the counter looked up as Caleb walked in with the puppy cradled against his chest. "Quote 79, quote," the man asked. Caleb hesitated. "Quote 80. Quote, he left with more than he'd planned. 2 stainless steel bowls, a small blanket, a chew toy, formula milk the clerk swore he'd need. At the register, when the total came up, Caleb pulled out his wallet without much thought. Quote 81, quote, the clerk offered. Quote 82, quote, Caleb said. The man gave him a look, the kind that said he'd heard that line before. Caleb didn't elaborate. Outside, Milo shifted in his arms, burrowing closer as though the matter of where he belonged had already been settled. Caleb glanced down at him, then toward the road. For the first time in longer than he cared to measure, going home didn't feel like the only option left. Milo arrived at the house on a gray afternoon. The air held traces of damp earth and sawdust. Caleb set the carrier in the entryway and unlatched the door, bracing for a burst of anxious energy, or at least a few cautious steps into the unknown. Instead, the puppy emerged with startling composure and began surveying the rooms like an inspector on assignment. He paused at Caleb's boots first, sniffed each one with professional focus, then moved on to the old radio on the lower shelf, the work jacket hanging by the door, and finally the untied lace on Caleb's right boot, which he pawed once, as if noting its inexcusable condition. Caleb stood back with his arms crossed, trying not to hover, failing entirely. He hadn't understood how deeply quiet the house had grown over the years, not until something small began moving through its rooms with such deliberate purpose. Milo ignored the new toy Caleb had bought him, walked right past the folded blanket on the floor, bypassed the water bowl for a solid 30 seconds, and then discovered a single work sock poking halfway out of the laundry basket. With the savage triumph of a warrior claiming spoils, he wrenched the toy free, 3 strides toward the living room, but he misjudged the lip between doorways, pitched forward, and went down hard. Caleb inhaled sharply, a flash of worry maybe, but Milo was already back on his feet, rope still locked in his jaws. He carried himself with that unshakable composure found only in very young puppies and very old men of principle after an undignified fall. Caleb laughed, sudden, unplanned, and the sound hung in the room longer than he expected it to. That first evening arrived in small discoveries, one after another. Milo encountered the mesmerizing physics of shoelaces, the stubborn permanence of chair legs, and the irresistible gravity of Caleb's kitchen. 3 separate expeditions required. He tasted a little food, lapped at some water, then folded himself into an artless heap beside the sofa and slept. Caleb had work emails waiting, a stack of unopened mail growing its own ecosystem on the counter. None of it mattered. He sat watching the tiny bellows of a puppy's ribcage rise and fall. When night filled the house, he assumed Milo would gravitate toward his blanket or the warm breath drifting from the heating vent. Instead, after a slow, methodical tour of the hallway, the pup positioned himself in front of the one closed door in the entire place and stayed. Caleb knew that door well. He'd built an entire choreography around never touching it, the way a person favors a bad knee or an old scar. Not dramatic, just careful. Just enough distance to avoid contact. No, he said, sharper than a puppy deserved. He dangled the rope toy, tapped it against the floorboards, offered the blanket again. Milo acknowledged each attempt with courteous disinterest, then turned his eyes back to the door. Caleb stood in the hallway, and the frustration climbing through his chest had almost nothing to do with a 5-week-old dog. You don't know what's in there. Milo, unmoved by this appeal to reason, lowered himself flat, chin on paws. Around midnight, Caleb surrendered to what stubbornness alone could never win. He opened the door. The room smelled of old cardboard and air that hadn't moved in a long time. Boxes lined one wall. A folding chair stood by the window like a sentry no one had relieved. Remnants of another life, pushed into this space, sealed, forgotten, had gathered a silence so thick it was almost physical. Milo walked in first. No hesitation, no ceremony, straight to the chair. He scrambled onto it as though this had always been the plan. Caleb stood in the doorframe a beat longer, then crossed the line and lowered himself to the floor. He pulled the closest box toward him, lifted the lid. He didn't dig through it, no grand excavation was needed. One open box was enough. One choice to stay in the room instead of backing out, that was enough. The days that followed shifted quietly, in ways that made the change easier to absorb. Clara started coming by more often, to see Milo, she said. She brought cornbread once, waffles another time, and on a third visit, a small bag of treats she announced Milo would despise if he had any taste at all. Caleb told her she was slandering his dog on his own land. Clara said Milo looked like he could handle it. Their conversation stretched longer without either of them forcing it. He told her about the job site, the men who wore toughness like armor around heavy equipment, but fell apart in front of paperwork. The strange hush that sometimes settled over the site when wind moved through bare framing with nothing to stop it. Clara told him about her father, a man who came home from service carrying things he never named. Her mother used to say that soldiers could be braver than anyone alive, right up until someone showed them simple, ordinary kindness. Caleb didn't answer immediately. His eyes found Milo, who was methodically destroying a blanket corner with an expression of complete moral authority. Quote, 85 quote, he said at last. Quote, 86 quote, Clara replied. Quote, 87 quote. The thing that caught him off guard wasn't how well Milo adjusted. It was the slow recognition that Caleb had started organizing his days around coming home. He stopped hanging around the construction site after hours, manufacturing reasons to recheck locks or review footage nobody asked for. He finished his shift and drove back, home. A word that once meant nothing beyond four walls and a locked door had started to breathe. One evening, he came in from work, sleeves powdered with dust, a dull pressure pulsing behind his eyes. He didn't make it to the couch, just dropped onto the kitchen floor, too hollowed out to think about food. Milo crossed the room in that clumsy half-trot puppies never outgrow fast enough, climbed into his lap, turned once, and went still, with the absolute certainty of something that belongs exactly where it is. Caleb laid a palm across the dog's warm back. I still don't understand why you picked me, he said quietly. Clara was standing in the doorway. She'd let herself in with the spare key Lily had insisted on, called it practical, called it necessary. In her hands, a bakery box. She heard the question, and answered it like it cost her nothing. Caleb looked at Milo, then at her. Something shifted, not dramatically, not with sound, just a loosening. The constant machinery of needing to justify everything before it was allowed to matter ground to a halt. Days later, Lily showed up unannounced, found Clara in the kitchen, found Milo sprawled across a heap of unfolded laundry like a small emperor surveying conquered territory. She took in the scene, all of it, then turned to Caleb. The satisfaction on her face was so pure, it almost glowed. Quote 90, she said. Quote 91. Caleb shook his head, but the corners of his mouth gave him away. Quote 92. For a long time, he'd carried a quiet belief that Milo had made a poor choice. A man built around rigid schedules, bolted doors, carefully measured distances. That man had no business receiving devotion so freely given. But with every day the puppy stayed, the evidence mounted in one direction only. Milo hadn't miscalculated at all. He'd walked straight into the part of Caleb that had gone dark for years, and with no effort, no strategy, pried open a door Caleb himself couldn't reach. Not every change announces itself. Some of the deepest ones arrive so gently you almost miss the moment, until later, when the weight of it finally lands. Caleb thought he was rescuing a puppy. What happened was something else entirely. He was being led toward a place he'd spent years refusing to enter. And maybe that's how grace works. Not by erasing what came before, but by setting something soft and living directly in our path. Something small enough to hold, strong enough to make us take one step forward. If this story brought someone to mind, reach out. It doesn't have to be grand, a phone call, a shared memory, a single honest word. The size of the gesture matters less than the truth behind it. If you'd like to share your own